Hello, guys, and welcome to FIAT LUX. Today on the show, we have Gsovereignty from the Nostrovia podcast. We're going to talk about Nostr, the Nostr community, and the wider decentralized social media ecosystem. So, welcome, Gsovereignty, to FIAT LUX.
Great to be here.
I'm glad to have you. Yeah, this was a really interesting topic, and I have to admit I don't know too much about it, so I'm excited to learn a little more about Nostr and what's going on over there. So I guess the first question, maybe we should start from the beginning. Maybe how did you get into Nostr?
So I've been in Bitcoin for quite a number of years, and more recently into sort of watching like what's happening with the Lightning Network. And one of my friends, who's also in Lightning, was like, this guy called FIAT Jeff he made a Lightning tip bot for Telegram and stuff, like a LNTX bot. And she was like, he's made this really cool looking protocol for decentralized social media. Like it looks like it could be actually really good. That was about a year and a half ago, I guess. And I had a look at that. I look at the actual protocol itself, and I was like, yeah, this looks pretty good, because it's very simple. It's very easy to understand, and like for a developer to use it, it's very easy to use. And the sort of potential emergent properties of this very simple solution are incredible. But that's not what was that was sort of okay. So I looked at it back then. I was like, hey, cool, this looks good. But there was no one really involved. There's like 3 people or something. I don't know. There's very few people involved. And then I looked at it again like 6 months after that, and the community had grown. And there was like a few hundred people in the Telegram group, and everyone in there was a developer. And the thing that really got me to pay attention was just the community, because all these developers just doing stuff that they want to do, and with like so much energy. The feel of that community, at least at that point in time, was really, really similar to the early Bitcoin community, and also sort of reminded me of the Linux community, sort of in the late 90s, when I was sort of dabbling in that. And so I was like, I immediately recognized like this is going to be something, because of the people involved. Nothing about the actual people involved, but just like because of the type of people who are involved and the way they think. Like you just get that feeling about this community. So it's like, this is going somewhere. Like this is going to work. Yeah. So that was sort of, at that point, that's when I decided to start getting involved and start working, like building things on top of it.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. I like that idea as well of like things kind of springing out of the sort of the chaos, or the or what was the term that you used? It's the evolutionary term where it's
Emergent.
Emergent properties. That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because people talk about like consciousness as an emergent property, and I think that's definitely a really interesting kind of side to the kind of like open source software ecosystem, and like you talked about like simplicity, when you can sort of build on top of things and almost use them like Lego bricks. That's I really like that concept. So now we've talked a little bit about how you got into Nostr, and maybe we should explain for the viewers, like what is Nostr? Why should people care about Nostr? What is it? And why should they look at it? Why should they move over from Twitter, Facebook, whatever kind of social media? What's Nostr? Why is it useful?
The main, I guess, so fundamentally what it is just it's a reversal of so you know how like the sort of traditional way things work is you have a client and a server, and the client is dumb and the server is smart, and the server stores all your data. It does all the state transitions. It's their source of truth that the client refers to. So this flips it the other way around. The client is what does all the work, and the server, which is in Nostr, we just call it a relay. It's dumb. Doesn't do anything. All it does is it stores events, and events are just data. So it stores data, and it gives you back that data when you ask for it. And the clients do everything else. So all the data that is stored on relays is it's signed by the creator's public key. So I should probably go back a little bit further, actually. So Nostr is fundamentally built around the concept of public-private key. So you have your I'm pretty sure your audience would know like public-private key pair, like it's how Bitcoin addresses work and all this stuff. So
maybe just explain, just the difference between a public, just the layman's what is a public key and what is a private key.
So a private key is you generate a random number, and then that's like your password, and then your public key is your public identity that's associated with that random number. So I can prove that anything that I sign with that private key is like, you only need my public key to know that I've signed it with my private key. So it's just proof that I signed something, really. So you have so with a Bitcoin address, for example, you have your private key, and you have your public address. So it's basically the same concept. So everyone can see a public address, but you can only spend coins by using your private key, which is the random number. So Nostr uses the same thing. You have you generate a private key, just literally generating a random number, and then you derive your public address, your public key, from that random data, and that's the thing you give to everybody else. So anything you publish, it's published as your public key, and it can't be forged. So like anything you publish, it's only from you. So you're not relying on like a server or something to say this was from you. It's the data itself says that. So I think basically the key takeaway is in Nostr, the data, all the Nostr data, like everything is all signed by someone's private key, which means you can see the public, like what public key that is. Essentially, from the user's perspective, it's like you only care about their public key. You don't care about their private key. The only reason you care about their private key is because that's how they prove that they've signed it. But essentially, what you see is all the data has come from a public key, and someone owns that public key, and someone can prove that they own that public key. So it doesn't matter what the server says, and in this case, the server is a relay. Your client is going to verify that data was produced by that public key. And then so if you follow someone, you're following their public key, and then you can see all the events, all the messages that they've produced. And your client can verify that regardless of what the server says. So like with Facebook or Twitter or something, the front end is just saying, well, the server says that this guy wrote that message, so this guy wrote that message, but you have no idea whether that guy wrote that message. Facebook could be making that up, and I wouldn't put that past them. So like, yeah, so that's one sort of aspect of Nostr it's not particularly new or a special technology. It's very standard. It's like been around probably since, well, forever, really. But what's interesting is just the way that the architecture, where with this dumb relay architecture, that's the interesting part. That's the difference. So what you're doing is like, imagine like if Twitter you could view Twitter as like similar to Nostr, except that there's only one relay, and that's the Twitter servers, and you trust them, right? So if like if you have your Twitter followers, if Twitter decides to ban you, that's it. Like they can't get your messages anywhere else. They can't subscribe to another Twitter server to get the messages, like another Twitter server that didn't ban you. But with Nostr, you can. With Nostr, you just have, okay, if this relay bans you, it doesn't matter because there's heaps of other relays and your followers can find you on any of them. So you can bring your data just, it's just going to route around any kind of issues that, like censorship issues or anything like that.
So that's maybe an interesting point to kind of go into, and that is that because you mentioned this sort of difference between Twitter and Nostr relays, and how Twitter's basically one big relay. One of the interesting aspects of decentralized social media that I've seen, and it isn't a feature across all decentralized social media, but for the most part, this seems to be what people are into, and that's the way that you can kind of carry your data with you, or your profile, or the messages that you've sent to people, your interactions with people, and I think that relates to this kind of user server interaction, right? Like, so for example, it also relates to the public-private key. So on Facebook, essentially they store your data, right? So you have to have a username and a password, and you're on this end, here's Facebook, and you have to ask them for permission to access your data on their servers, right? With this kind of stuff, you're talking about public-private keys and decentralization and relays and nodes and things like that. Essentially, the power dynamic is flipped. So the data is yours, and then you kind of connect to their servers. Then that's why you're able to sort of kind of like take your stuff with you, because you own it, right? You don't have to ask permission to move to a different platform. And to me, I think that's one of the fundamental differences. And I think it's also as sort of like a side effect. This is something that, like, I think just the general audience will be interested in. The cool thing about having like a private key is that you don't have to remember your Facebook login, your Twitter login, your TikTok, your this, your that. You have your private key, and you can take your identity or your data with you to these other platforms, and that's extremely liberating, right? It not only is it efficient, it doesn't consume as much time. You don't have to remember as much. It's just more fundamentally free. It's like it's your data, it's your profile, it's your identity. If you want to migrate that somewhere else, you're free to do that. And I think that's one of the things that really interests me about decentralized social media and Nostr in general. So I think maybe the next question I want to ask, we have touched on it a little bit. How do you think you've talked about the difference in social media, like current centralized social media? So what are some of the main benefits, apart from maybe the one I just mentioned, and also censorship resistance? What are some other benefits that Nostr provides? So you mentioned simplicity earlier. Maybe you could talk a little bit about like the simplicity and how you can build on top of things.
Yeah, so like from a developer perspective, the simplicity is key. It's really key. So it's really just a message standard. It's like you could look at it another way, which is that it's a peer-to-peer network, where you don't need to know the IP address of your peers, and you don't need to be online at the same time as your peers, but you can have a full interaction with them. So as a developer, it's like it makes things very, very easy. So you publish a bunch of messages. It looks to me like you're sending them to me from my through the developer experience. Like it's like your Nostr client is sending messages straight to my Nostr client. That's the way it feels like to the developer, which previously, like, that's not been possible because we need an actual connection to each other. But this concept of bouncing messages off relays instead, and having sort of just arbitrary numbers of relays and arbitrary ways of accessing them, that's what gives us this thing where, like, I don't care if you're online at the same time as me. It doesn't make any difference. So that opens up like a whole lot of flexibility and possibilities of what you can do with Nostr. It's really not a ground. There's nothing technologically groundbreaking. It's really just Fiat Jeff just put it together in the right way, and it's like, here it is. Like
kind of like Bitcoin, like sort of like there was
Bitcoin still. Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No, go ahead. No, it's fine.
Bitcoin is still technically much more interesting than Nostr, because it's like the concept of so proof of work already existed, but combining proof of work with a block time, that's what made Bitcoin like really new, like a really new thing, to solve the double spending problem, right? It's like that was the novel use of proof of work, and that was, I mean, yeah, I guess it's also not like crazy technical breakthrough, but it's still like a pretty serious, and also like cryptographically, like, I'm not a cryptographer, but cryptographically, like, that was a pretty hardcore thing to do. Whereas Nostr is like very simple. It's really just like having the wisdom to see that you actually only need something this simple. That was the breakthrough.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I see what you said. What I kind of meant was, it's sort of, you hear people talk about Bitcoin being, in some sense, elegant in its simplicity. Not that it was a easy thing to achieve. Obviously not, or someone else would have done it before Satoshi. But I think to a lot of people, even, okay, I've heard like someone, for example, like Adam Back, right, who you mentioned proof of work. He was the guy that is sort of credited. There is some debate about this, but he was the guy that's credited with inventing proof of work, and he was mentioned in the white paper, the Bitcoin white paper. But he talks about the kind of like the way that everyone was like talking about decentralized money and these kind of concepts way before Bitcoin was invented, and it was like something Satoshi just put the right parts together at the right time, and it took off. He made compromises or trade-offs that maybe other people hadn't seen, other people hadn't foreseen. But then once, I think the way he explains it is, once he saw it, it was simple. That it was kind of a surprise, like, oh, okay, we just do it this way, and people really seem to it's taken off. So that's kind of what I meant by sort of like it's simple. Not that like you said, the technology wasn't like breakthrough. It wasn't. Obviously, it's a massive accomplishment. But yeah, it was sort of it maybe shocked a couple of people that they were working on this problem since like the 80s, and then Satoshi just fit these parts together that were kind of already existing, that maybe people had talked about in forums and online. So while we're on the topic of Bitcoin, and you mentioned these relays, is a relay similar to a node? So for people that are familiar with Bitcoin, is that a good way to look at it? Is a relay like a node?
So a Bitcoin node has state, right? Internal state, which is the current state of the blockchain. And then you update that state with signed messages, which is your UTXOs. So, so a Nostr relay doesn't have any state, or it has state, but not that kind of state. It doesn't need any. There's no consensus, right? So Bitcoin's state is there's a consensus over the current state of the network, or the current state of the UTXO set, and Nostr doesn't have anything like that. Nostr has there's no agreement on what the current state is, and there's no agreement on what data exists or doesn't exist. It's purely up to the individual relay to decide like what messages to keep and what not to keep, and so like every relay can have different policies about that. So for right now, for example, there are now like paid relays coming up, where like they only keep messages if you pay them, and then other relays will only store messages if your identity has like an associated username with it, which is it's called a NIP5 identity. So like that's like it's like metadata about your public key that you can set. Yeah. So some relays will only store your messages if you've set some metadata about your public key to show that, like, because that's a little bit more difficult than just generating a public key. You actually need to like add some extra information in there. And then still there's another way, which is like you can associate your public key with a DNS domain name, which proves that you've done something on that domain name to put your public key in there. And so that's that's like a harder step, more difficult step again. So some relays will only store your message if you've done that. So there's all these different mechanisms by which relays will decide whether or not to store your message, and also whether or not to reply to a request to send your message back out again, right? So some relays will do like spam filtering before they'll send the messages out. Usually they're paid relays that do that. But yeah, so the relays themselves are like the sky is the limit of what you can do there with a relay. But essentially all they're doing is receiving messages and then sending them back out again upon request. But yeah, the heuristics for deciding like what messages to store and what not to store, that's up to the relay. So there's no global state, and there's no like Twitter has a global Twitter feed, right, of all the messages. Nostr doesn't have that because every relay is different.
Okay, and that I think that's an interesting thing maybe to talk about. So you mentioned spam filtering. I had heard about these private relays, and one of the reasons for them is spam, right? You just mentioned Twitter, and as we know, there's a problem on Twitter with spam and bots and things. In fact, there's a problem on the internet, right? It's just it's kind of a battle we have to fight constantly. And so one of the ways that private relays were explained to me is that they are useful because you incur a cost, just like in the same way Bitcoin has the proof of work system, which proof of work was originally intended to fight back against spam, email spam. And so in the same way, these private relays essentially are making you pay to use them because it's it's not cost effective for a bot. Then basically, like if you have to pay $10 a month, you can't really run any bots, so you can't spam. Or if you have to pay for a very small amount, let's say you have to pay half a penny, half a cent for each message, right? That's fine when it's one message, but if you're using a bot to spam 10,000 messages a day, then you're gonna, it's gonna get pretty costly pretty quick. So that's one of the advantages. I think it's also like a fundamental shift. You have to kind of like we're talking about public and private keys, and like what's the way to view them? Is there something that's analogous in the world today? Something that people generally people would understand. And I think that's one of the concepts. This kind of concept of spam and like paid access or proof of work. I think people are maybe in some ways put off by it in the same way that they are with Bitcoin, like because people look at the existing examples like PayPal or Venmo or whatever, and they see that you can sort of transact for free. Essentially, it appears that way. Depending on whether you're a vendor or merchant or whatever, maybe you incur a cost, or there's like a if you're using Visa or whatever, they charge you for using that service. It's just a small percentage, but that's where they make a lot of money. But you kind of have to wrap your head around this because we're so used to this like freemium model, like that where basic, but it's not free because they're selling you data essentially and putting ads in front of your face and doing all sorts of weird things with you. They're benefiting from your data basically. Like Facebook are doing experiments, they're doing social experiments, they're doing social engineering. They just try things on people, whenever they please. Oh, let's just like screw with politics. Let's like change the way that people interact or the way, or like let's see if we can like alter people's emotions if we like change the it's not, I'm not necessarily it's all nefarious, but anyway, the point being that they own your data, they can do what they want with it, and then they use your data to do all sorts of things that you're unaware of. That's the point I'm trying to make. And so this other way of viewing things is essentially that you're paying for the service, and I think that might put some people off. If we're talking about like Bitcoin with the transaction cost, or if we're talking about a private relay, but I think that's the reason that might be people might be put off is because we're so used to this viewing things as if they're free, because it's not true that you're not paying. Like if we're talking about like actually giving Facebook money, you don't pay to use Facebook. But you do have to give up something of yours that is valuable. So in a sense, that's how to look at it. You are paying for it. And so, yeah, I think maybe that's just an important kind of concept to wrap your head around. You have to kind of understand that the existing system isn't free. And what you're paying for here is a service, essentially. Like if you're paying for a relay, it's because maybe they provide... maybe it's a faster relay, right? Maybe it's or they're filtering spam out for you. There could be a number of things, which I'm sure things that you would know better than I do. So just to I guess to move on to another question. What kind of challenges do you think Nostr faces in terms of adoption and scaling? Because we're talking about these private relays, and now anyone can run a relay, and there's all these relays out there, and you can just move to each one. Are there any issues with scaling? Like, where is there a limitation to Nostr? Is there a limitation to the amount of relays you can have? Is there a limitation to the amount of relays you can join or like be part of?
That's a good question, because we've just went through like a period of like a hefty amount of spam hit the network, and that was what pushed people over to the paid relays basically. So the core issue, which is now being solved, I think, is that like you can publish your events to any relay that you choose, right? But then I can only see them if I'm listening to those relays. So like, what relays should I be listening to, and what relays should you be publishing to? And that's actually the thing. Like right now there are around like there's over 1,000 relays. You can't publish to 1,000 relays. I mean, just technically speaking, like a browser or a client-side app like a you can't open 1,000 WebSocket connections and then publish to them all with everything you do. And then you also can't do that in reverse and subscribe to them all. And even if you could, that would just be like, I mean, I don't see how that would cause so many other problems. So like, that's not a viable. There'll be no point in Nostr if that was the only way. So the problem has been like, how do you know what relays to use? Which basically means, how do I know what relays the people who I want to follow, how do I know what relays they are using? So there's this new Nostr improvement possibility. They're called NIPS, which is like a Bitcoin improvement protocol, the BIP process, but for Nostr. And there's one that's NIP 57, which is like really interesting. This is how we solve this problem, and a lot of clients are now implementing this. So basically, like, you publish your list of relays, and I need to get that list from somewhere. But once I have it, I know where to follow you. I know which relays to follow you on, and you can update that list whenever. Like, if some relay blacklist you or something cool, like, you add some more relays to it or whatever, change your relays around. Or maybe you just run your own relay, your own personal relay in the cloud, and that's the only one you publish to. And so if I want to follow you, that's where I get your events from. So like, these kind of, the architecture right now is being figured out in real time through a process of being like attacked. Basically, like, the network gets attacked with spam or whatever, and then people figure out a way to deal with it, and then we come up with like these solutions like NIP 57. It's really become like a living system, or an anti-fragile system at this point. I think this is why I think it's like game over for all these other systems, all these other social network systems. Well, that's one of the reasons anyway. The other reason is, so you touched on this a little bit before with what you just mentioned, but like, do you remember MySpace?
Of course, yeah.
So they basically were unaware of the fact that no matter what social media platform you're using, at the end of the day, the community owns that platform, not the actual company behind it. And as soon as they forget that, they get wiped out. And that's what happened with MySpace. And that's how Facebook got them. And now Facebook and Twitter, they've forgotten that. But Nostr will never forget that, because they never controlled anything to start with. The user has controlled it from the beginning. So all the development is driven from the user side. So that lesson is baked into Nostr, which is why, and that's the first time I've seen that in this type of system, in this type of like social media system, like Mastodon and all these other things. Like, they haven't, that's not baked into those systems at all. So like, they can always fall prey to like a relay operator getting a bit like political or whatever and banning people. It's like, well, but you don't own. That's just like, they've forgotten the lesson that they don't own the community. The community owns them. So.
Unchecked governments have eradicated privacy and truth. Those who resist are brought down swiftly, but we refuse to submit. Lunapunks are freedom fighters, protected by encrypted shadows. The future we're building is sovereign and uncensorable. The moonlit night is coming.
LunaDAO is an investment fund based on Lunapunk philosophy. Sovereign individuals assemble squad wealth to leverage collective strength. become investors, and allocate funds into privacy projects and anonymity tooling, building a portfolio of supported privacy assets. By this, LunarDAO supports the developing teams, expands freedom and crypto sovereignty, and captures value in the upcoming privacy cycle. Any member can exit the squad at any time. Members are anonymous, hence can build Lunapunk vision without fear of frozen funds, legal implications, or any kind of repression. LunarDAO aims to move to a full Anon setup and expand the Lunapunk forest of encryption, a sanctuary where society can redefine itself, self-administrate and regain its economic, political, and moral agency. LunarDAO also supports research on privacy technologies, listed in the wiki at wiki.lunardao.net, and educational structures such as Adalin Academy at adalinacademy.org, where people can acquire knowledge and master skills in programming and economy while developing a philosophical frame to generate the future path of the Lunapunk ecosystem. The launch is coming soon. Stay tuned and follow Lunapunk Squad on Twitter. Yeah, I love that kind of process in these kinds of ecosystems, like like cryptocurrencies or decentralized social media, open source software. Because you mentioned the NIP and how that's similar to Bitcoin improvement proposal. And I guess I was wondering if maybe you could explain just a little bit about that process, because you mentioned NIP a few times, and I'm sure people that know about Bitcoin already know what a BIP is, I would imagine. But like you were talking about how it's owned by the community, it relates to that. I think NIPs, I think it'd be interesting for people to maybe understand a little bit about how it is so that it's owned by the community. Like, how are we able to contribute? And how is that different to, you mentioned like Twitter, right? So, we've seen recently, for example, right? I think Elon has pushed a lot of people to, things like Nostr and Mastodon, because, I think from my perspective, even the people that were, wanted Elon to buy Twitter, right? The Elon fanboys, they love Elon, they love everything Elon does. It's great, and he's going to make Twitter the best thing ever. But what happened was that he kind of didn't he didn't stick to what he promised, right? Like, he was like, oh, I'm going to make it free and we're going to bring everyone back. And then he selectively chose who he wanted to bring back. The reasons we're not really sure of, but I'm pretty sure some of it's to do with money and advertising revenue. Because the advertisers weren't that happy about him letting certain people back on the platform. But he'd promised that he was going to let all these people back on, and Twitter was going to be free speech and all this kind of stuff. And then we saw what really happens when a, quote-unquote dictator or central authority is in charge, right? Because you could argue that it's actually more centralized, right? Like, Elon's like calling the shots now. And yeah, there was a CEO before, but it was a little more relaxed, right? It's pretty obvious that Elon's at the top of the hierarchy. And so I think people have recently realized, oh, this is the danger of centralized systems, because no one ever realized it before. Everything was fine on Twitter. Yeah, there was some, people were talking about censorship and, how they've been banning people and, the guidelines or, the terms. And it had always been seen as a bit unfair. But I think now Elon's really made it clear. It's really hard to deny now, because you can see it in real time. And he's sort of like, because he promised it. If he hadn't just said anything, if he'd just shut up and not said, "Oh, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this," then maybe he would have got away with it. But I really think he's actually done decentralized social media a massive favor, because he's just made it so obvious what the dangers are of having everything centralized and having it all the control and the power of one person. And so, yeah, I think just to get to the question, I think that also relates to the NIPS a little bit, right? Because it's like, well, it's owned by you. You're the community. You can contribute. It's not just, oh, I'm the guy that makes Nostr and therefore what I say goes. So could you explain maybe a little bit about NIPS and how how the community gets involved and how they can contribute.
So I'd say we have to separate a couple of issues. One is like the NIP process, but also that's not how. I mean, the fact that it's owned by the community is a separate issue to the NIP process. So the NIP, like, you're sure anyone can contribute a NIP and whatever, right? But I mean, like social open source projects are always like that. Like anyone can contribute, and there are maintainers and whatever. And it's like there are so many systems where it's like, oh, it's open, anyone can contribute, but then you find out actually not really. So like with NIPs, so there's the key difference between a NIP and a BIP is with Bitcoin, it's like you really need upfront agreement from everyone before you can implement a NIP into Bitcoin, because everyone's got to come to consensus over the same thing. With Nostr, you don't need that. So a BIP is Bitcoin improvement. What's the word? I got a mental blank. Bitcoin improvement.
Oh, proposal.
Proposal.
Yeah.
So, but a NIP is a Nostr improvement possibility. So they're different in that way, as like exactly as you'd expect. So a NIP, like in order for a NIP to really be taken seriously, it needs to be. You can propose something, but it's like, where is it implemented? Who's implemented it? And where is it being used? Because you can implement stuff immediately in Nostr. Like if you want a NIP that's relevant to relays, like a way for relays to handle messages in a specific way or something. Well, you can implement that right. You can implement that right now. You don't need permission from anyone, and you can use it right now, and then other people can use it and see how it goes. The same as like on like a client, like you can propose a NIP to do something on the client side, like a way to handle Lightning payments or whatever. Okay, propose the possibility, and then implement it somewhere and show us how it works, and then it'll get taken seriously, right? And then so NIPs are generally not merged into the GitHub repo unless they're implemented like at least like twice in two different projects. Because in the early days, it was like just implement it in one project or just have a proof of concept. But the bar is raised now because there's like so many NIPs. So like, so now it's like, okay, like let's see a few people implement this.
See it working across multiple domains. That's interesting. I see. That's useful.
Yeah. But there's no sort of roadblock to doing that. There's no, you don't need
the App Store's permission to put the whatever the friggin' extension is for. Or, in the same way Android, you have an APK, you've got to get it on. Android's a little more open, but maybe, the iPhone's a better example.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to tinker, if you want to make an app, and you want to put, you can do that, right? You can get the iOS dev tools or whatever, and you can create stuff, but you can't put it out to the public and test it. You don't have that permission. You have to ask Apple's permission to be able to release that to public. So I would think, in terms of the value of experimentation, adaptation, evolution, how fast these things can move, how fast other people can contribute. You can get a prototype out there, and you can get feedback, and it can adapt and evolve in its extremely like quick way. In comparison to the old or traditional existing paradigms of like the Apple App Store or the Windows Store or any of these kind of things. So I think that's like a really cool side of this whole ecosystem. Like as you say, you can just build whenever you want. You don't have to ask anyone for permission. And it's not just about like permission. It's not this kind of screw the authorities kind of thing. We want it is about that, but in a sense. But it's the main benefit of that permissionlessness or the idea that you can just build on it and you can create your own thing, is that it actually advances the tech faster. The problem with the permissioned models is that it's slow, it's bureaucratic. It's actually a bad way to make things. Not always. Obviously, there are places for centralized services and proprietary software or whatever. I guess there's a debate about that as well. If some people think everything should be open source, but or Libre open source. I think is it Libre free. I think that's the distinction. Excuse me. But to me, that's what stands out. Like I love the fact that anyone can just build upon these systems. But I think maybe more important is the way that makes the systems evolve. I think like people don't realize like how much innovation is kind of like spurred on just by the underlying foundations of the technology. When you build it in this other like weird closed off way, like it just doesn't have that like you're saying, like emergent property. It's almost like it's like evolution, right? It's not this. So if you imagine this centralized proprietary software kind of way, it's very linear, it's very focused, right? You just have this like narrow lane. Whereas if you imagine like the process of evolution, this is kind of how like decentralized and open source things kind of work. It's almost like a mesh, and there's things coming in from the side, and maybe this is a bit hard to understand why I'm trying to do sort of hand movements. But if you can imagine, just for the audience, the proprietary software and these permission systems are very narrow. Whereas if you imagine like the process of evolution, where there's millions of complex interactions all creating this thing in an organic way, like that to me is really cool, conceptually. And I actually just think it's a better model. It's just a better model.
So I'll tell you another way to think about it. So there are two. This is a made up story, but there were two engineers, and they wanted to build a bridge across a river, and like there's a town on each side of the river. So this one engineer spent like 5 years designing the perfect bridge and everything, but he built it like slightly too far. Like this, he built this perfect bridge, but no one used it, and he was like, "Why is no one using it?" And then he walked up the river like a few kilometers and found like another bridge, which was just like hobbled together out of like random bits and pieces, but everyone's using it. It's just full of traffic all the time. And he asked the engineer behind that bridge, like, how did you get everyone to use this piece of shit bridge, basically? And the guy's like, well, I just threw a rope across the river first, and then we just put a pulley on it, and people could send goods across. And then that gained traction, and then so we put another rope, and then another rope, and then we added like some slats to it so people could walk across, and then like it just kept getting bigger and bigger, right? So like it's like you need the freedom to be able to do that kind of thing. You can't if you need to be perfect as soon as you release something, no one's ever going to use it. Unless and because you're not accurate, your solution is not accurate. It's not in the right place. So it's like it's the way humans solve problems is we pile problems and solutions on top of each other, and combine them together, and like I mean, you understand this obviously from what you just said, but like I just I wanted to say that a different way of thinking about it.
No, that was great. I love that. Well, while we're on this, I think this is could be a good segue into other use cases. So we're talking about how it's organic and people can build on top of it and things like that. You mentioned like the simplicity of it earlier on. As far as I'm aware, because this is kind of open to people, it means that it doesn't have to only be used for a Twitter alternative, right? It can be used for many things. One of the examples I heard was someone built a chess engine on top of Nostr. And so I'm interested, I guess, in other examples of things that are built on Nostr that maybe aren't specifically social media related. And just before you answer, I kind of want to just kind of go back to basics. I just thought of this. And maybe this is helpful to people because I really do want to sort of hammer in like what the difference is and why it's useful to people. So I talked earlier about, you carrying your data with you, sort of like it's your data, you're able to move to different platforms, but retain a kind of persistent identity or a persistent profile. In a simple way of looking at it, and this is for the audience, just think about, guys, imagine you had your Twitter profile, right? You've set it up, you like your bio, you like your profile picture, all the connections you have, stuff like that. And I'm not just talking specifically about Nostr because I know there are certain things in Nostr that might not be the same as other decentralized social media. We've got things like Lens Protocol. Like they have a kind of a similar thing. You can take your data with you, or your like this persistent identity. Imagine if you didn't like Twitter, you didn't like the home feed. There's 10 other Twitters out there, right? More, but just for the sake of this little bit of conversation, right? Imagine, guys, if you didn't like Twitter, you didn't like the feed, you just didn't like how the messaging side of it operated, you didn't like the font it used, you didn't like the speed, the reliability of it, you didn't like the algorithm. Maybe your feed is filled with political nonsense, right? Not even smart stuff, not even people like actually figuring things out, just like, oh, you're a left wing this, you're a right wing that, right? Maybe you don't like the way that the algorithm's sucking you in and like, like feeding you this poison. You know what you can do? You can just take your profile, move it onto another platform.
You don't even need to take it and move it.
Well, yeah, exactly.
It already exists on the other one.
Yeah,
it already exists there. Also, you can still follow everyone you were following before from the people that you wanted to follow on the new one as well, because it's all there as well.
So imagine
imagine
how powerful that is, guys. Like imagine, like you said, you can pick and choose, right? If you're not happy with it, you can go somewhere else. You have options, right? But you in the same way that if there was like 10 different Twitter apps, right? You don't lose what you've already built up. It's not a case of, I have to make another login and I have to do this and I have to go through 2-step verification. Oh no, well I've already signed my mobile up. This number's SMS, this number's already registered with this thing. And it's not all these like limitations and barriers to entry. You can just use something else. And that's what's beautiful about it. Like the variety, essentially. You're free to choose something that works better. You're not stuck. And in fact, build your own. If you're like interested in programming and you think you can make a better one, you can do that and no one can stop you. So anyway, to get back to the question, and
I'll add one more thing to what you just mentioned, which is that you not only don't need to sign up again or anything, your followers don't even need to know what version of Twitter, in this example, you're using. Like they don't even care which one you're using. They can see you wherever you go.
And this goes back to the beauty of that you mentioned. It's like the simplicity, right? That it's simple, and so these things can interact with each other in this very fluid way. Like you say, it's not like it's like, oh, the Twitter API is not backwards compatible with X, Y, and Z, and so therefore, it's not possible to do these things. It's like these things are easily able to be sort of parts are interchangeable. Things are interchangeable, and that's due to the simplicity of the system itself. Because once you start building all this complexity on top of it, then you have to, as you were saying, like you have to think about different version numbers, then you maybe even like different hardware and like different operating systems, and it just becomes an absolute mess. And the only way to solve that is just through a central authority that dictates everything. That's why, despite how kind of crappy the whole Apple ecosystem is, the one thing you can say about them is that the locking down of the software and the way that they have also have like a lockdown on the hardware makes it easier for them to streamline things. It makes it easy for them to control the process. So, as opposed to like Android, right? You've got to make sure that the latest OS update works on 2,000 devices, you know what I mean? Whereas Apple, they have to worry about 3, you know what I mean? They don't have to worry about backwards compatibility or not working with this API because they have everything all contained. They own everything. And so while that is a benefit...
But they still can't even get that right half the time.
Yeah, you're right. And in fact, they do get it right, but they make you pay for it. It's like, oh, well, we've got this solution, but you need to buy the Apple speaker to do it, and you need to buy it only works if you buy Apple stuff. Yeah, it's great that it all connects together, but you can only buy Apple stuff. You can only pay them money. All the money's going into their pockets. But yeah, anyway, just to get back to the question. So other uses, what are there any interesting uses you've seen of Nostr that's not typically social media?
Yep. So the most crazy and most interesting use I've seen of it is to create a decentralized organization. And this is something I saw a while ago and haven't really done much with it, although I have contributed a little bit to it. But this is the most ambitious thing that I've seen done of Nostr, and it's like combining Nostr and Bitcoin together into a decentralized organization. It's basically just using that peer-to-peer or pseudo peer-to-peer aspect of Nostr. So then, like, you can think of it like how Bitcoin's a state machine where you update the state by sending transactions, and then the miners, do their thing. So this is like the same thing, except that it's using Nostr events to update a state machine, which is like the tracking the current state of a decentralized organization. So like, yeah, I think I haven't really I'm not the best person to talk about it because I haven't completely wrapped my head around it, but it's the most insane thing built on Nostr. Yeah, and it would really show you that like it's not just social media or anything like that. So yeah, I guess I'll yeah, the name of it is Stackistan, but because I can send you a link or something for show notes.
Yes, but Stackistan.
But, yeah, Stackistan. So
okay, we'll put that in the description.
But don't. Yeah, it's very early. It's very early. It's broken most of the time, but it just shows you the potential.
Proof of concept. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. We like experimentation. So I guess what advice or where would you direct someone that's interested in getting involved? Where would you point them to for like what's the easiest way for someone to just learn about Nostr?
I would say it depends why they want to learn about it. So for a developer, I'd say just go to the protocol specification on GitHub. If you just Google for Nostr GitHub, you'll find that. And then if you're more like a user, if you've got an iPhone, the best clients. I don't have an iPhone or anything, but the best client on iPhone is called Damus. And then on Android, I use one called Amethyst. There's a really nice client called Coracle, which is just coracle.social. It's a web client. There's also Nostr.band. So it's Nostr.band, band like music band. And that gives you like a really nice overview of the activity on Nostr, like the current activity on Nostr, and it'll show you like the newest users and like what they're saying, and like the most followed people and all this kind of stuff. It's really cool. I kind of like that one. There's to have a look at all the relays. There's Nostr.watch. But yeah, because of the decentralized nature, there's no one place to go. Or you could probably go to like Nostr Awesome, which is a GitHub repo, which is like every project has a -awesome Git repo which tracks all the cool projects in it. That's also good. Like you just search for Nostr-awesome. Oh no, it's awesome Nostr. Sorry, awesome-Nostr. That's just like every new programming language or every new project that involve a lot of developers. Like someone always makes like an awesome blah, right? Like and actually the guy who created Nostr, he created Awesome Lightning, which is just a list of all the cool Lightning projects, all the cool ways to use Lightning. I'd say there's no real Google for it. Google for Nostr and see what comes up. Because also this stuff changes like on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are the things, like we're saying, there's been a couple of things brought up, that these are sort of like the things you need to wrap your head around if you're someone that's used to the old models. As you're saying, it's like, it's not centralized, so it's not, you don't just go to apple.com, right? Which actually makes it better, because maybe apple.com, whoever writes the articles on there, isn't that good at explaining things. Maybe it doesn't explain it in a way that relates to you. Maybe it doesn't even have the language that you understand. But with decentralization, with things like Nostr, because it has global access, because anyone can use it, that allows people to create their own alternative forums and blogs and guides and things, and they can translate them into whatever language they want. They can make them as short or as long as they want. But yeah, that's kind of like a conceptual override or shift, I guess, that people would need to make. As you say, it's not like you can just point to one place, and that maybe sounds maybe a little daunting for the average person, because again, they're used to just going to apple.com or google.com or facebook.com/support forum or whatever, but once you actually get into this kind of stuff and you shift your mindset, you realize actually how powerful it is and how much of a better way to do things it is. And just to maybe we could finish on this. You did mention Lightning, and I recently came across Nostr Zaps the other day, and it's also obviously another use case for Nostr. It's another way to use it. Maybe could you explain like how you can use things like Bitcoin or Lightning alongside Nostr, and yeah, how is that like different to things like Twitter? Because they've been, you can do like tipping and things on Twitter, and I think you can like link your Venmo if you're in the US. But obviously Nostr, again, it's an open ecosystem. So I would actually imagine it's not just Bitcoin that you can use to build on top or integrate into Nostr. Can you use other things?
You mean other cryptocurrency?
Yeah, Ethereum, Solana, or whatever, whatever it is.
You could, but I think, yeah. So Nostr is a very Bitcoin-centric community, and that's, I would say, because, it's full of people who understand Bitcoin, which means once you understand so this is often a tangent, but so like Ethereum, as an example, is not going to let you do anything that a large government doesn't want you to do. They have to yield to the state, so they're under the state, under state control. So in my view, like, there's no real benefit to that over like a central bank digital currency, which has the same thing, like a Turing complete contract platform on a CBDC. Yeah. Because why? Because you got to trust. You're trusting with Ethereum. You're trusting a central authority. So why wouldn't you just go for the most powerful central authority if you're going to do that? So Bitcoin was designed from the ground up with the state as the adversary in mind. So it's built to fight a state. That's what it's for. It's for people who don't want to comply with the state. Whereas Ethereum or any of these other ones, they're not built with that in mind at all. They're not capable of standing up to a state actor. So people in Nostr are generally Bitcoin people. They understand that that's why we have Bitcoin. That's what Bitcoin's for. And that's what Nostr is for as well, because we don't like the current system. So, I mean, there's not much point in integrating like Ethereum with Nostr because, well, we're not interested in being part of the current system. So that's why Lightning has been widely adopted within Nostr, within the Nostr development community, and everyone's implementing Lightning stuff. So with Zaps are like, so Lightning itself is payment channels, which is like a whole other topic, which I can actually introduce it. If you want to talk about Lightning, I can introduce it to someone who can really like give you a great conversation about that.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
But essentially, Lightning is just a much faster way a much cheaper, faster way, more efficient way to transact Bitcoin. And you only need to settle it on chain, like at certain times when you under a certain trust model. So with Lightning, what you do is Lightning is based on like invoices. So you generate an invoice and someone pays it. So a zap is like you are, when you zap someone with Lightning on Nostr, you're contacting their Lightning server to ask it to generate an invoice for you with the amount that you want to zap them with, and then you send that to them, and then their side, like the person you are sending it to, will like also like verify that they've received it. So then everyone can, and people trust it. Like if I say that this guy has zapped me, like in a the trust model is such that, like, you know, it's good enough that you can see how many zaps this guy's received, how many zaps this public key has received. So that's NIP 57. Oh, I misspoke earlier in the show. It was NIP 60. NIP 65 is the NIP for like finding what relays you're using.
Okay.
Yeah, and NIP 57 is the NIP for zaps. And it's a relatively straightforward NIP to read, actually. So yeah, if someone's interested in, like, but you kind of need to understand a little bit about Lightning. But yeah, it's essentially just a way to generate Lightning invoices within Nostr clients. It's a standardized way. Yeah.
So is this used for for tipping and things like that?
I don't really like the word tipping,
Mm-hmm.
but boosts, like to boost your post.
Why is that? Maybe that's interesting. Why don't you like the word tipping?
Because
Makes you feel like you're busking. Makes it like,
yeah, something like that, right?
The framework you're in is like rich versus poor frame. Is that what kind of how? Yeah.
Whereas like, it's just like, well, if I see like someone said something cool, it's like I want to boost that so other people see it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I do that by sending real money to boost it. So it's not really tipping. It's like more fundamentally.
Well, you're giving the person a boost. You put in resources behind them, right? You're helping them financially. So you are boosting. You give them a little bit. That's a way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's a way. It's a way of looking at it. Yeah. I just really don't like the concept of the mental framework of tipping, but I think boosts are way more productive.
Yeah, I think you haven't explained that. I think I agree, because Well, it was immediate. Obviously, I sort of thought of the busking example, and I was like, yeah, I can see how it is a little maybe derogatory is not the right word, but it's I don't know. It just has a bit of a stinky
It's
feel
something.
to it.
Yeah, there's something there, right? Like it's not quite right, and that's not. And like the mentality of the Nostr community and the Lightning community and everything is like we're not in that. Like like tipping is like as a feudalist in a way almost. Like it's like which is what we're trying to get away from. I just get like like yeah.
Yeah, it's like here you go, peasant. Like here's like a penny for your troubles. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. No, that's a really cool. Didn't expect to get into that, but that was a cool little segue. I like that. Okay, so you can boost people using Lightning, the Lightning network, which is sort of like a what do you call it? Like alternative rail to do Bitcoin payments on. It's sometimes I explain like layer 1s versus layer 2 as like train tracks, and you can kind of the guy in the little control room does the thing, and the track sort of moves, and then you jump onto that track, and then you can kind of come back on. And maybe the track on the right is a little faster, a little cleaner. It's a high speed rail, whatever you want to call it. And so maybe that's a good like mental model for people. Okay, well we're coming up to past the hour mark now. So I just want to ask, I guess, where can people find you? In fact, do you have any? Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Anything either that you've got going on that you would like to promote? Anything that we missed about Nostr that you think's really important? Just anything you want to talk about. I want to give you the floor, and you can talk about whatever you like.
Yeah, I think the key thing with Nostr is that, like I said before, like the community owns the system itself. So, and not in a abstract way, but in a direct way, because everyone owns their own data and can take it, do whatever they want with it. So everyone everything else is a service provider competing for that data within the Nostr sort of market. And I think that's how that's like a reality check, like a constant reality check that developers are getting, and node like relay operators are getting, and like that's the guardrails that keeps it on track, kind of thing, which I haven't seen in any other social media network anyway. Like Bitcoin has its own guardrails that keep it on track, which is like you can't make changes to the protocol without near unanimous agreement between everyone involved, and also the people who actually control the Bitcoin protocol are the people who receive Bitcoin in exchange for something else. Like that's the only set of people who have any power within Bitcoin, which is an often overlooked thing. Like but that's how it stays on track. It's like if you try and create a Bitcoin fork, well, you got to convince people to accept that as payment for something. Otherwise, like that's it. They're going to use the other one. So, so Nostr's got the same kind of thing, except that it's with data. With your data, that's how it keeps it on track, and I think that's why, like, you combine that with how quickly things can move because it's so decentralized, because it's so permissionless. Like you said, it's evolution, right? So, I mean, like this, it's extremely powerful. I mean, look what evolution did.
You have to see it to believe it. That's the thing. Yeah, because when you're outside of it, you don't you see, again, back to the, what people are used to. You see like, oh, Apple, the iOS version 1. I mean, I'm picking on Apple here, but it's just the best, it's one of the good things to pick on, and it's an easy example. But, it's like iOS version 1, iOS version 2, iOS version, and there's kind of this like I was saying, like a linear, narrow focus. But you have to, everyone's experienced that, so they kind of know how that works, right? Like Apple, they do a keynote, and they're like, yeah, we're doing these features, it'll be released on this date, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I think once you start getting into open source and decentralized systems, distributed systems, and, all of the things that come with it, it's then once it sinks in, that's when you get like the goosebumps moment, and you're like you said, that word you use, powerful. You're like, wow, like because people don't even know this is possible, again, because they're so used to the framework of and it's, not that I'm not judging people or whatever. Like, I'm sure everyone at some point is in that framework to some degree or another. Of course, if that's all you're used to, that's all you're gonna know. People don't actually know this stuff's out there. Like, they don't know the power that's available to them.
Completely. And like, even like, so like whenever, so actually the most common thing people ask me who are new to it, this is just probably because the circles, not my circles exactly, but like the kind of people who, people ask like, how do I invest in this kind of thing? It's like, well, I don't know, man. You got to figure that one out yourself. Yeah. Like, good luck. Build something useful. That's how you invest in it. Like, figure it out. Yeah. And that's like a really good. I think that's like a really good way to keep it clean. It's like, build something useful and people will use it. Like, I'm talking specifically about Nostr, but build in general, of course, as well. But like Twitter and Facebook and all these companies, like they get free money, so they get freshly printed money straight from the money printer, right? And so that means they have all this. I mean, they used to get Elon. I don't think gets that anymore for Twitter, but the previous regime did. And so like that's how you get all this malinvestment. This is like because the money was free. So with Nostr, it's like there isn't any free money. It's people building stuff because they want it. And like, if you want to build something, you can't market your way into getting people to use it. You actually have to be better. Like, which actually is not that difficult right now. It's early. Like, you can actually, if you're a half competent developer, you can build something with Nostr and people will fucking use it. So,
well, that's actually you just made me think, like, that's maybe another point that people like, people talk about, like, capitalism and, how sort of these, a company like Twitter or Apple or Google, how these things operate. But ironically, in a weird way, like, these models we're talking about are actually more ruthless in some ways and more competitive. Even though they're like freer and more liberating and more inclusive, which is funny. It actually has the both extremes. It's like way more inclusive, way more liberating, way more free, permissionless. You can change it, adapt it to your own uses, do whatever you want with it. It's in your control. But it's also extremely competitive. And it's like, if you, like you said, make something useful. If it's not useful, it's dead, man. It's relegated to the recycle bin on GitHub. It's like it, and it's so competitive because things are coming out every day. Every day, new people are joining, new people are working on it, new people are contributing, new people are forking, etc., etc. So I just thought about that. It's funny you mentioned that, because you do actually get kind of both extremes in this world. Like, projects, they have a rise and they crash and burn, and you actually have to create something that's good, not just like capture users and then everyone's like, well, kind of don't like Twitter, but it's a ball ache to set up a new profile and move to another thing because my friends aren't there and everything. So a lot of people just use these things because it's just all they have. It's like learned helplessness. It's like, well, what else am I going to use? Everyone's on Twitter. How else am I going to speak to the world? But yeah, with these kind of systems that we're talking about, is an immense amount of it's like incredibly competitive. There's not like a monopoly in the same sense where it's just like Google creates all the new products that everyone uses, Apple creates the new products, Twitter does the new thing, Meta creates all the products. It's like there's there's millions of small projects, popping up everywhere, like we talked about the evolution thing. And again, that even fits in the evolution analogy. Evolution, like, nature's ruthless. Nature doesn't give a shit. Like, I don't know if that's not your thing. Maybe that's sort of finish a lot. If that's not your thing, like, it's not an easy play. It's not. These aren't easy concepts. I would never want to deter people from it. But I would say, like, if you're maybe not so kind of like, if you're not in the kind of mind frame that works well with this kind of stuff, like if you don't feel comfortable, like maybe I'm not saying deter people, but like take it easy, learn the basics. It is a lot to wrap your head around. We've talked about private, public keys, and improvement protocols. The way that you contribute forks. There's all these terms and things. Once you get used to it, it's not so bad. Yeah, I mean, it's also not for everyone. I mean, I can't say that everyone is going to jive. Some people are going to stay with decentralized models. Some people maybe like proprietary code for whatever reason. I'm not too aware of that many reasons, to be fair. But I think it's definitely a little bit of there's a learning curve. That's all I'll say. There's a
learning curve, but it's actually not that steep though, and I think it's an easier learning curve than Bitcoin. And it's a much less scary learning curve than Bitcoin. But it's also like the really cool thing I like about Nostr is that it's like a gateway to Bitcoin in a way. I think I think this is like, it's educating people about their public-private key pairs and like how do you deal with that stuff, and then because the most you can lose is like your followers or something. Or not even that, you probably get them back. There are ways around that, but like you're not going to lose money. So like, it's like for a lot of people, I think this is like the zone of proximal development into Bitcoin is through Nostr. It's going to and especially with Lightning, like it's really like, even for me, like I've been in it for years, right? The Bitcoin, but then for Lightning, it was like I was totally aware of it before. I've used it before, but it was only when I saw like people doing like combining Lightning with Nostr is like, that's the killer thing. Like this is gonna fucking dominate. This is really like, this is gonna. It's just the raw power behind this, the raw like force of nature. This is going to be very exciting.
Awesome. You're getting me excited. So let's, if everyone else is excited out there listening to the podcast, where can they learn more about Nostr? By that I mean, explain how people can get to you, get to your podcast. Just throw the links out there.
Yeah, my podcast is with myself and BitCarrot. Is Nostrovia.org. But I don't. Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. Listen to that. I don't think it's that useful. It's really for other developers. I don't know, because like other people have told me that it's interesting to them
I think it's
so.
You're being too humble. I think it's fun, man. It's like, yeah, of course it's like a bit nerdy and like maybe you have to really want to sort of understand it, but you guys joke around, you have a bit of fun, like I enjoyed listening to it. So yeah, definitely check out Nostrovia. What platforms is it available on?
I guess all of them. I tried to submit it to like Apple and I just failed, and I was just like, okay, fuck it, I don't care. Like there's an RSS
I'm not there
feed.
yet either. Yeah. No, I had the same thing. They want me to, and this is and we will end in a sec. This is maybe the final point. I won't rant for too long. I tried to get this podcast. I'm still in the process of doing it. I still want to do it because I know that it's useful. Even if it's only just to pull people away, even if I can just get into Apple to be like, hey guys, come over to like Rumble or YouTube or whatever, some Bandcamp, or like whatever it is. I tried to sign up to the. You have to do like Apple Podcast Connect. They want you to have an Apple ID. Then they wanted me to verify my phone number. And this was the worst part. This is the hurdle, right? Then, and it's just on principle. This is why I haven't done it. They were like, you need to open up an Apple service, meaning Apple software. It's not like you can go to do it on the web, right? They want to accept the terms and conditions. There's like a media rights terms and conditions because you're joining the ecosystem and you're putting content out there. So it's like you need to accept this media terms thing. But the only place you can do that is somewhere like Apple Music. I don't own an iPhone. I don't have an Apple Music subscription. You can't get to Apple Music from the web. You can sign into the Apple Store and buy like a Mac from apple.com, but you can't get to iTunes. So I have to, basically what they're forcing me to do is install iTunes just to click check a checkbox or tick box, press agree to terms and conditions, and then I can uninstall it, and then I'm allowed to put my podcast on Apple Podcasts. And on principle, I just hit a wall, and I was like, I'm not installing iTunes. So I went around asking my friends that have Apple, and I was like, is there like a back door to like iTunes? It's like a web app or something. Is there some portion of the, apple.com that I can go to get this terms and conditions thing just so I can press agree so that I can finish the final step of verification just to put my podcast on there? So screw Apple. If you're listening, screw you guys.
Yeah.
But
they're not listening.
No, for sure.
I noticed that because I published it on and I'm gonna move platforms, but I published it on like Anchor, which is like a anchor.fm, which is like a Spotify thing, and and okay, so you can get it on Spotify really easily. Like I use Spotify or whatever. But anyway, I noticed also because they give you statistics, right? And it's like I tried to publish on Apple and no, like fuck off. Same reason for you. And then, but then I noticed like actually it's people are listening through Apple, like in the statistics. Just like I still have like 100 listeners who are on Apple. So it's like, all right, I don't know how that happened, but it seems to work.
Apple's big. That's the one thing that like why I haven't sort of like just completely disposed of the idea of at least trying to get on into their ecosystem, because I don't know the facts, I don't know the figures, but I know they have a lot of users and a lot of people listen to podcasts through, because it's, I mean, I've never used the software, but I imagine, knowing Apple, it's like very simple UI, it's made for like 2-year-olds, you just go, oh, I want to listen to that one, and it's like, and it works, as remember the old slogan, it just works, right? But okay, that's awesome. All right, so I will obviously put all the links below, so you guys can find the Nostrovia podcast. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'd like to have you back maybe sometime in the future, and we can talk about other things. If you ever wanted to talk about Bitcoin or any other kind of like open source projects, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for your time. Do you have any final last words?
No, it's good. Yeah. I might. I'm gonna dive deeper into a few of the projects I mentioned. So maybe I don't know. Maybe in the near future I can give you a deep dive on some of them.
We could talk about the DAOs and it wasn't autonomous. It was just a decentralized organization. So we could talk about that. All right. Well, again, thanks for coming. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been FIAT LUX with Gsovereignty from the Nostrovia podcast. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.